Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video we're going to talk a bit about agentic AI. And specifically we're going to talk about AI for CAD and the Autodesk Assistant, which now has a button in the UI of Fusion where it was released, at least to the public in some form in the March release. And March 17th there was a minor update that put a button here. Now there is a tech preview you can enable that allows it access to your models. It can do things like apply some basic operations like fillets. It can create geometry, limited geometry, do things like modify parameters, change materials, and so on. We're going to explore that a little bit. I also want to talk about some other AI CAD tools and just AI in general. This is probably going to be a longer video. I'm ashamed to say that I've tried to record this video probably a dozen times. Every time something's come up, I've been interrupted, whatever the case might be. I'm going to try to keep it as pointed as possible, but it's going to be at least 30, 40 minutes, I guarantee. And so we'll put chapters in the bottom of the video. So if you want to skip ahead to like the Autodesk Assistant part, then go ahead and do that. But I want to cover sort of four main topics in this video. And like all the videos, it's unscripted. It's just kind of me rambling on. And since it's not a how-to, that may tend to stretch a little bit. But we're going to talk about what AI is. We'll talk a little bit about my perspective. We'll get into some examples of things that AI claims to do, and then we'll actually look at the Autodesk Assistant and see how it sort of lives up to the hype. So first things first, what is AI? Well, a couple years ago, you never would have seen AI listed on a product. That was kind of an off-limits term, even though many products on the market actually did include what we now consider AI, large language model, that's built for a specific purpose. Google Pixel's phone was probably one of the earlier examples of a mass-produced product, and it used it for image processing, and that's kind of why it got the sort of reputation of having such a good camera system. The concept, or at least the term AI, how we know it today, has been around since at least the 90s. The concept in general has been around for 100 years probably, so it's not new. But in the past year or so, it's become so mainstream that now every program has to have AI. It doesn't matter if it's, your bank app or QuickBooks or TurboTax or, basically name any program that you interact with, it's got AI at some level. And so it's important that we understand a couple of basic things about it. First, AI is really large language model. It's a program that is trained on certain data, and it's doing its best based on the inputs you give it to give you an output that it thinks is closest to what you're looking for. Now, Autodesk has been doing AI research for quite a while, probably almost 20 years at this point. Fusion hasn't even existed for that long. And so they had been working on their own CAD LLM, and I'll leave links to this stuff in the description of the video. You can take a look at the publication, some of the benchmarks that they've been doing. Last year at Autodesk University, there were a lot of different videos that you can go back and watch on what they're trying to do with AI. It's not just Fusion, it's AutoCAD, it's Revit, it's Alias, it's Maya, it's all these different programs that they're trying to put the Autodesk Assistant into. To the best of my knowledge, the Autodesk Assistant does not have external access essentially outside of the Autodesk ecosystem. So access to help files and product documentation. I'm not sure if it accesses the form or not. I don't believe so. And then, of course, its own training data. And then in specific tasks, obviously, it has access to your data, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But in general, it's important that we understand that these LLMs work best when they are trained on specific data and have a very narrow task, right? The sort of broad spectrum LLMs, the things like your ChatGPTs or your Grok or your Gemini or Bing Copilot, all these other things are really like trying to be such a wide variety of things that most of the results you get back from them are just junk. Now I've got a lot of experience with a couple of different AI models, and I have yet to find one that I've been happy with. And so I think that moving forward, there's a lot of validity in locally hosted LLMs. There's plenty of open source models. You can train it on your own specific data if you wish. that's offline, and you can have it be a true co-pilot to assist you without worrying about your data going somewhere. Now, again, I do think it's important when we talk about AI in general that you do your own research. Don't just trust what I say here. And so Autodesk has this ebook about their trusted AI practices. I would strongly suggest you go in and read it. It'll talk about like the protection of your data, your intellectual property. It'll talk about their involvement in the EU AI Pact. They'll talk about their capabilities, the program, where it's going, what they're trying to do, and so on. So if you want to take a look at any of that stuff, again, I'll link the Trusted AI Center in the description. They also have these transparency cards, which to me I thought were a little bit silly, but these are basically, they look like nutrition fact labels for food, and they have information about the very specific AI. So if I go, let's just open this one here. It's going to bring up a page and it will talk about, let's look at the Fusion Auto Constraint, for example. So again, it looks like a nutrition label, trust ingredients, user-directed feature. This means that you have to physically invoke the use of the feature. Personal data, no. The data sources is the customer content. It has to look at your sketches, and then it talks about encryption and so on. Now, these AI tools don't work offline. And so there is a level of data that is being transferred. So for example, if you disconnect your internet and you try to use the Autodesk Assistant, it's not going to work. So it's not exactly a local LLM, but it is, in terms of their privacy policy and their transparency, I feel pretty confident based on the fact that I read all privacy policies. I feel pretty confident in the Autodesk one. You have to make that decision for yourself, obviously, but again, there's tons of information here. Their impact report and talks about sustainability and so on. That's another topic that's a little bit of a sore spot for me. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole in this video, but all the Autodesk Cloud stuff is AWS, Amazon Web Service. And Amazon is not a great company for sustainability. They claim to be sustainable, but really they do that by purchasing carbon credits to offset their pollutants. So much so that if you go back a couple years, and again, do your own research, you go back a couple years, 20, 21, 22, they were buying a couple thousand carbon credits. Fast forward a couple years, now they're buying millions, 60, 70 million of carbon credits to offset their pollution. So, these companies can claim to be sustainable and net zero and all this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, they're basically flushing cash to offset the pollution, which, it's going to planting trees in the rainforest and things like that. So it's not exactly a, zero effort, but it doesn't reduce the amount of pollution actually going into the environment. It's just offsetting it. And I'll leave some links to things like this presentation about the Autodesk Assistant. Again, it's not specific to Fusion. There's add-ins for Revit, for BIM industry stuff. There are tools for generating surfaces for car models inside of Alias and so on. So again, do your own research. I don't want to tell you everything about how it works, but I do think it's important that we understand at the very least the privacy policy and understand that it is a specific LLM that's trained on internal data. It's not trained on your models. To the best of my ability in reading all the privacy policies, it does not appear to use your data to train the model. It's pre-trained on accessible data from Autodesk and from other sources. And so that's always important to me. All right. And so with that said, let's go ahead and talk about my perspective. Now, personally, I'm not anti-technology, but I am very much anti-forced technology. AI is one of these forced technologies. It's been pushed into everything. And in many cases, it's not opt-in. You have to opt out of it. YouTube is a great example. When they started pushing their AI-based, basically voiceovers and closed captioning, that stuff was on by default, which meant the hundreds of videos on the channel automatically started converting into 10 different languages, replacing my voice with another voice. And they're also working on changing, the face of the presenter in the video so that the mouth matches the voice that they're using in the dub. And these kinds of things being opt out rather than opt in are very shady to me. Now, there is another checkbox inside of YouTube where you can allow it to use your videos to train AI. I have that disabled, but that was a one that was opt in and not opt out, thankfully. At least to the best of my knowledge. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've had to deal with it. But, these technologies being forced and a lot of them you having to opt out of it really tell me that there's not a lot of return in investment on these, that there's a bigger, sort of a bigger thing at play. And so with Autodesk Assistant, it's a tech preview. You have to opt into it. The chat functionality of it, which is basically like a glorified help file, that's just on by default. You can use it if you want. There is no privacy policy that you have to accept to use that. But for the tech preview, you do have to accept a privacy policy. And so for me, with like the shift to Windows 11, I've done everything I can to gut Copilot from it. I've gone away from Office 365, which is now Copilot 365, to using only Office for all my documentation. I've been playing around with different Linux distributions and really, focused on more privacy-based browsers instead of using things like Chrome. And even I do have to use Chrome for some things. I've changed the actual web search to DuckDuckGo so it doesn't use Google's backend. And again, try to do everything in sort of a privacy-focused manner. I think that there is the sort of a generational thing that happens for those of us that kind of grew up in the 80s and the 90s, didn't really have internet until mid to late 90s. It was an optional thing. That the privacy and always being connected is a bit more of a focus for me personally than people that have always grown up with smartphones and always been connected. They're less likely to worry about things like having their location always turned on and tracked by Google and things like that. So anytime there's a new tool that's pushed and forced on you and it's free, it's a big question mark to me as to what is the benefit of it for the company that's pushing it. And so I tried to kind of use that mindset on technology in general, right? If there's a tool that is free and even if it's providing some value, what is the product? If you're not paying for it, then you are likely the product. And I think that's true with a lot of these AI tools. And so I avoid all of the big AI tools. Anytime that I do use like AI chat, I do it through a DuckDuckGo privacy browser. And so, for example, you can use DuckDuckGo or you can use Brave, you can use something else, and you can start to ask privately to search the internet, or you can use Duck AI Chat. Even if you don't have a subscription, you can still access some specific models. So you can see here, Llama 4 Scout, Claude Haiku 4.5, Mistral Small 3, the GPT-4o Mini. These are all ones that we can access anonymously and then ask specific questions. And so this is kind of how I interact with AI when I need to. I don't use OpenAI. I don't use Copilot. I don't use Gemini. I don't use Bixby on Samsung phones. I don't use Alexa. I don't use any of these sort of these tools because I don't feel safe about their privacy policies and what's happening with the data. So that kind of paints my picture of these AI tools and what when I go into them, I always kind of disable these things first. I look into them, decide whether or not it's beneficial. There's also the big aspect of the environmental impact, right? The amount of power consumption and water consumption and the data centers being built to support all this infrastructure. And so when you've got, endless prompts for, things like Gemini or, Google searches or things that are constantly returning all of these AI results by default that you can't turn off, the power consumption goes up. Now, you can make the argument that just web searching has a power consumption amount, and that's true. But it is much larger for using all these AI models. So I am a strong proponent of trying to use local LLMs inside virtual machines to do development. And when I have to connect to one of these external ones, again, I try to focus on more privacy-based, like using DuckDuckAI or Duck AI. But that's my own perspective. And that's kind of paints a picture of these AI tools for me. So now let's talk about some examples. Now, examples, what I mean is these are like claims, and I'm going to call out Autodesk on this because in a lot of their documentation, they'll make claims like design the way you think. Let's see, collaboration made easy, new way to interact. Maybe it's here. Let's go here. Benefits, actionable insight, real-time chat assistance, product selection, admin actions, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. All right, so there's all these claims about what these tools can do. And when we go through our examples, I'll show you that it's still much quicker if you know what you're doing to do them manually. Now, of course, these tools will improve and get better as people use them and provide feedback. But I still think that there are a few key aspects of these AI assistant tools that should just be 100% off limits from my perspective. So the first thing is reducing friction in tasks. And this one kind of goes hand in hand with the second one that is often talked about of like simplifying tasks, like making tasks easier. One of the examples for the friction in daily modeling that I do, and I'm in Fusion every day, is going to be the interaction of the tools. So I'll give you an example here. Let's go to a pattern. So let's say that I wanted to pattern this body. I selected the body. I can't hit tab to go to the next selection box. I have to come over and click an axis, pick the direction I want to go. Then when I get to the numerical entries, I can tab to the next numerical entry boxes. If all of the dialog boxes inside of Fusion were able to be tabbed to, like going back through like we can to the numerical entries, that would greatly simplify the task. Because once the Autodesk Assistant is closed, if you're doing stuff over here and you have to come over here, click, come back over here, come over here, click, and like back and forth, those mouse movements, while it may seem silly going back and forth across the screen, that kind of stuff is what makes the tasks take longer. Now, you might think, okay, well, it's just a couple of seconds. That's true for one feature, but if you're working on a design that has hundreds or thousands of features, that does add up to quite a bit, not only in like things like wrist strain, but just, again, the amount of time it takes to do those tasks. So for me, reducing friction in everyday tasks is not asking an AI assistant by typing it to do something, like typing in exactly what I want. It's making the tools work better. The AI assistant is just going to access the API and use those tools. And the second thing is very similar, like simplifying tasks. Again, this is a friction point. Tools like trim, for example. Trim only allows you to select one trim tool, and then you select the area that it's trimming on something else. Other programs like SolidWorks have had mutual trim forever, where you can select multiple surfaces, and then you can select the areas you want to remove. That's how Quick Surface works. And Fusion has that capability in the boundary fill tool, only if you're turning it into a solid right then and there. And that's not always the case with surfacing work. Sometimes you still need it to be a surface, but you have to do things like trim a bunch of bodies, and so that way you can blend them together, whether it's with a patch or fillets or whatever the case might be. And so the functionality is kind of halfway there with the boundary fill tool if there was an option to use surfaces that don't create a closed cell, but you can still use it to trim. And so those kinds of things would simplify tasks. Other things that kind of happen in larger models when we're doing surfacing work, it ends up happening with things like surface trims, where you go back to an earlier feature and you rebuild, and then it selects the wrong side of a trim. It just kind of flips which side that it's doing, and that has downstream implications where it's messing up the entire timeline. Or if we had the ability to freeze or lock features from rebuilding rather than having everything rebuild, right? So if you're working in a hybrid design or a really complex part design where you've got, again, I've got designs where I've got thousands of sketches and, hundreds and thousands of features. And in these cases, it can be very, very painful to rebuild an entire timeline. And that's another thing too, again, like reducing friction and simplifying tasks. The timeline is great until your models become fairly complex, and then the timeline becomes really hard to manage. And there are just better ways. Every other CAD system uses a feature tree. Inventor does it. SolidWorks does it. pretty much every other CAD system does. Fusion was different in the fact that it had the browser and the timeline, and I think it was a good novel concept, but I think the ability to actually use this more as a feature tree rather than the browser and the timeline, I think that would go a long way in terms of like reducing friction in tasks and simplifying tasks. And so, again, at the end of the day, using an assistant, whether it's the Autodesk Assistant or some of the others that I've seen on the market, to do some of these tasks, don't improve the way the tools work, and the tools, having an improvement in the selection process, like again, tabbing between the selection boxes, that would go such a long way into making these tasks easier. Another claim that always comes up is faster decisions, and my example is going to be faster isn't always better. This was kind of based on Zion Brock's radio, which we talked about in the thermoforming video. This is one that I'm building for a relative of mine. And essentially, the start of this process was looking at a bunch of images of old radios and then starting the design. Now, the way I started it was with a somewhat complex sketch. It's a spline, and it's got some linked parameters, and it's got dimensions for controlling, the corners. And I essentially used this to start building the model. And then I extruded it in 3D as just kind of a very simplistic shape. I looked at it, I kind of made some decisions, and then I went through the process of adding additional curves so that I could curve the top and curve the sides and then keep the bottom fairly flat. Now, in that entire process, I knew exactly where everything needed to go on the inside. So I've got the speakers and the mechanical components, the microcontrollers, and so on. And so that kind of was driving a bit of the shape. Having to 3D print it is driving a bit of the shape. And then when I looked at this, I basically was just thinking, okay, well, I need to manufacture it. So I'll create a small flat lip on the front. I'll taper it so that I can print it unsupported. And then basically use that throughout the process to make those design decisions. And the point of going from, after I was done looking at images and kind of deciding the direction, the initial sketch and feature, 10 minutes probably, going to a more complex one where, I'm doing some lofts and some additional work to get the shape, probably another 10, 15 minutes. So we're not really talking about a whole lot of time here, because I knew the thought process of what had to happen to make the design functional and printable. I knew what had to happen in order to get the end result I wanted. I knew the tools. I knew I could use things like loft. I knew I could taper this in. I knew I could shell the body. And I didn't have to spend a lot of time hunting for tools. If you relied on an AI to kind of find the right tool for you, you're not going to be able to ever progress in your design and make those quick decisions like, should I loft just the top of this and then patch the bottom of it? Or should I use a sweep from front to back? Or should I do a centerline loft? Or should I just extrude it and then add fillets and round things off? These are all design decisions that happen kind of on the fly. There's not like a set process that you go through. But it's not really any slower than saying, okay, generate the shape for me. But oftentimes you don't know what you don't know until you start designing. Now, part of the process of the initial design, which is generally a very small part of the overall design process, is coming up with these decisions along the way, deciding where components need to go, deciding, how many buttons there are, where the buttons need to be placed for ergonomic sake and, ease of access, and where the cables are going to come out, how you're going to attach certain features. That's an iterative process. And being involved at the beginning means that you know exactly the root definition of the sketches and the features and what you need to do to make changes to that. And so the whole idea behind like faster decisions and quicker to market, to me, those are not really benefits. And yes, the idea about getting a product to market quicker is a good one, but not at the cost of losing what makes the design unique and well thought out. And so anytime I see not just the Autodesk Assistant, but any of the AI tools kind of tout the ability to speed up the design process, to me, I think that it's important that we take the design process for what it is and keep in mind all the decisions that happen along the way that have an impact on the functionality, the look, the aesthetics of the design, the manufacturability of it, and removing those decisions that happen along the way in the design is going to just lead to worse products. And just relying on these AI tools to do it for you means that you're kind of taking away that decision process that makes the design what it is. Now, from a consumer product, you may spend an hour or two coming up with concept shapes, and then you may spend 100 or 200 hours refining the design, adding all the internal features, making it manufacturable. And so if you're kind of shortcutting that 1 to 2 hours at the front, the 100 to 200 hours on the back end is not really getting impacted very much in terms of efficiency, right? You're not really helping the process out that much when you look at the bigger picture. And so for me, those faster decisions, quicker to market, I don't really think of them as big benefits. One thing that drives me nuts, and I've been doing this for ever since the update, is Fusion does not remember my enable camera pivot and my constrained orbit. I don't know why. Just on my desktop here, my laptop, it remembers it just fine. But every time I have to restart Fusion, it defaults back to that, and I have to reset it because the orbit is funny. Yeah, so fix that, please. All right, and the last big claim that I think is made with these CAD tools is talking about managing data. And this is probably the only area where I think there's actually some validity to the claim. So if you have a big design and you've got, let's say, a lot of hardware, having to change the hardware based on a coating or material, that can be a big problem. And so if you're using things like Insert Fastener, which is a dedicated tool inside of Fusion, theoretically, it could have the ability to replace all the fasteners in a design with the same head style, same length, same thread pitch, but switch materials. That could be something that, if it works, could save a lot of time. Other things like changing all the materials in a large assembly. So if all the parts are ABS, but they need to be ABS PC, going in and having it find all the ABS plastic parts and changing them to ABS PC, that could save you some time. These are also things where, at least currently, while this Autodesk Assistant is running, you're not locked out of your design, but you really shouldn't be doing any other design work while it's working. And so it's one of those things where, like, if you do a local render, you're kind of waiting till the render's done until you can do something else. And so these claims about managing data could be helpful if you're kind of setting it and forgetting it, walking away and doing something else. But in the process of design, especially asking it to do these large complex tasks, I don't think really helps all that much. And so with that said, those are kind of most of the main claims that we see. Again, things like reducing friction, simplifying tasks, design decisions, quicker to market, and so on. What I want to see is these tools provide more insight potentially into the design process. Like if you've got the plastic design extension and you've got the design advice, I think an improvement to that tool could be extremely helpful. I know the Autodesk Assistant is working in the manufacturer workspace, providing insight into programming, helping with setups and things like that. I haven't tested that out yet, so I'm not sure how good that is, but these are areas where I think there could be some benefit, not actually taking away the control, but reviewing what you've done and making suggestions on improvements. That's an area where I think these tools could help. Things like saying, okay, increase your RPM of your tool 5% and you'll reduce your program, the programming time by 10 minutes or something like that. If it can look into those insights and have knowledge about feeds and speeds, you can take a look at how your part is set up in a vise or soft jaws and understand the clamping forces, things of that nature. Those could be helpful tools. I still think that having the knowledge to do that on your own is more important than relying on the tool to do it. Again, just my own personal preference. Okay, so now that we've said all that, let's go ahead and just do a test run of the Autodesk Assistant. Again, I've enabled the tech preview and I've accepted the privacy policy. I've read through it and I felt like it was pretty good. I mean, the privacy policy is a privacy policy. It's fairly vague, but if you go to the Autodesk Trust Center and you read the white papers about their trusted practices, those all made me feel pretty good about accepting it. I do turn it off when I'm not using it. I don't leave it on, but again. All right, so let's first take a look at just the chat or the text assistant, which is basically, again, accessing things like product documentation and the help file. Now, this first example here, I want to point out that you're still probably better off doing this the manual way, and I'll show you why. All right, so let's pick a tool. As we scroll down here, when you hover over a tool and you've got tooltips turned on, at the very bottom, it says press Control plus / for more help. So you can read the tooltip. You can say, okay, boundary fill does this, but I need more help. You press Control /. It will take you directly to this sort of help section where it tells you how to use the tool. Some of these help sections are more helpful than others. So for example, let's go to Loft, Control /. And now we've got this whole section on what to do, the different areas, tips on how to use it, what happens when you use closed profile, and so on. And so if we were to do the same thing in the Autodesk Assistant, we said, what do you use Loft for? All right, so just kind of asking a general question. Now, in order for you to know the Loft tool, you would have already had to find it in the Create menu. And so if you're already in the Create menu, you can just hit Control / and go to the help file. The other thing that you can do while it's running, if I open Loft, is you can hit the little I in the bottom left corner. Again, it gives you a little tech tip. It gives you information here. It says, tips, change the continuity. And then if you click more information, it'll go right to the help file again. So we'll close that out and cancel it. And you can see here. So Loft tool is used to create smooth, solid, or surface body that transitions between 2 or more profiles. Think of it as blending shapes together across the space. Here's a summary. So this is a little bit more than the help file. And then it gives some information about what it's used for, key capabilities, and a quick example, and then a link directly to the help file, right? So if we click this actually opens up in a different browser, and it takes you right to the help file, right? So we've already seen this. This is exactly where we navigated when we hit Control /. So this is like help file plus, right? In some cases. And in other cases, it's just going to regurgitate exactly what the help file is. In this case, I asked it, what do you use Loft for? So it gave me a more pointed example. If I said, how do you use Loft, if I can type, it's going to give me a different result. Now, I haven't tried this. I haven't asked it about Loft before, but I'm going to assume it's going to give me a different result. It goes into the documentation, and it starts to feed back the basic steps. This is, I guess, word for word, verbatim, what you get from the help file. So again, it comes back to how you ask the question. How do you use Loft is different than whatever I typed up here. What do you use Loft for? So this is exactly what you see in the help file. The first one is a bit more information. Some of it comes from product documentation, some from the help file, potentially some learning content. I don't really know. But you can see here, again, it points you directly to the help file, which is going to give you exactly what you see here. So the first thing here is, again, it's kind of like help file plus. You can access the help file by going up here and searching help. You can access it by, again, going into any of these tools, going to the information, and going to more information. It'll take you directly there. Or when you hover and you see the tooltip, you can press Control and /. There are some tools that actually don't say that. I don't know one offhand. Most of these do. Sweep. Okay, here's an example. Sweep doesn't say Control / underneath it for some reason. If you click on it, you can still get there by going to more information. So there will be some kind of oddball cases where it doesn't show. But that's the first example. So even if you don't accept the privacy policy, the Autodesk Assistant is like, again, an extra access to documentation. It could potentially explain some nuances of things. Some value there if you're trying to learn what tools do. If you're just getting started and you want to ask questions, this is potentially a good way to do it. The second step of what the Autodesk Assistant is kind of supposed to do is actually interact with your model. And I'll work through a couple of examples here. Some of these come back to things like simplifying tasks. If the tools worked better, then we wouldn't necessarily be in this situation. And the example here I'm going to give is fillet. And so if I select an edge, if I did this in SolidWorks, next to the cursor, a little dialog pops up. It would be the edge we selected. The next option would grab all the vertical edges or the edges in the same sort of orientation as the first one I selected around the outside of the part. The second option that we would have that's right in the, right next to the cursor is all of the vertical edges associated with the body that we're working on. And then the next one would be something like all of the edges. And so if the tool worked like that, that would drastically simplify the process. The way that we have to do this now is by doing a box drag from bottom right to top left, but we need to do it with our selection manager priority set to edge priority, or turn the selection filters. So we want select through, but we only want body edges. And then what we can do is box select and grab all the vertical edges, hit fillet, enter 5, and there we go. And so it's possible with a couple of steps, if you know what you're clicking and where to do it, it could be much better if the tool was just improved. Now, if we ask Autodesk Assistant the same thing, we have to be extremely precise with what we're asking. And so, for example, if I just say fillet all the vertical edges on the part, it will struggle and it'll have to figure out what I mean by vertical. And so the way that we do this is we have to say, fillet all edges parallel to Z axis 5 millimeters. And so once I tell it parallel to Z, it's going to be much easier to find those edges, theoretically. I haven't tried this yet. But if I just say fillet all the vertical edges, it doesn't know what vertical means. Now, as we look at a part, we can say, okay, well, vertical makes sense. It's the Z direction. That's what we do. You can see here, it's still trying to identify the edges. It's checking the geometry. Nothing's happening on screen. We can still do stuff, but I would still caution you to not really do much, because anything you do is going to kind of interfere with what's going on. And so again, even though I said parallel to Z, now it needs to identify which edges are parallel to the Z axis. It's running through it. It says I can't directly query the edge direction through the available tools. However, I can reason about the geometry from what I know. The body has a volume, I don't care. It gives me the length of the edges, don't care. Identify Z. I need your help. Could you please tell me what is the height Z direction of the body? I believe it's 10 millimeters. I don't know. I'm just going to guess. And so here, throughout this whole process, just trying to get it to do a fillet on the vertical edges, even though I said they're parallel to Z, it needs extra information so that it can identify what I mean by vertical edges. And so that entire process, all of this, going through, trying to figure out how to do a 5 millimeter fillet on those edges, we could have just as easily done, again, if the fillet selection tool had worked properly, or if we just come down here and we say we just want body edges, and we do a box select, and we grab them, hit 5 and enter, and it happens in a couple seconds, right? Keep in mind the selection filters are different depending on if you're in a feature. So if I hit fillet again and go back to these, notice that it's only got a handful of features that are available for selection. If we're outside of that, then a lot more things are available, things like mesh bodies and joints and so on. And so again, it comes back to, I don't see a case where this is providing a ton of value if tools like the fillet tool behaved in a more reasonable sense. If the fillet tool was improved, then this wouldn't even come close to helping us. Now, in a case like this, it didn't really do a good job, and I think that this is a fairly simple case. Now, if you were to say fillet all edges, sure, it can just grab all the edges real quick, but most of the time we don't do that. I could say apply a chamfer to the sharp edges, 1 millimeter. Now, again, it's got fillets. It knows that I'm looking for sharp edges. It has to sort of figure out what we mean by sharp, and then it's going to have to assume we mean 90 degrees. there's probably an angle where it won't do that. But because it was really trying to grab all the sharp edges, it was able to do that a bit easier. The next thing, again, we have to be careful with is we have to be specific with our inputs to the point where you need to already know how a feature works and like be able to define what you want. And I'll use another example here. I'm going to create, let's just create some sketch points. I'm not even going to worry about like a proper pattern. So I'm just going to toss some sketch points in here. I'm going to ask it to create a hole at that location. And actually, first, let me go ahead and do this manually. So I'm going to go from multiple, and I'm just going to click all these points. Now, I could do something like a box select to grab points if I wanted to. I think that's not actually a point that I want. And we'll do that. And then I'm going to say through all. I'm going to set this to a tapped hole. It's going to be, let's see, unified. We'll do a 1/4 inch. So I'll find 1/4. And then I'll do it modeled. I want it to actually physically create the threads. All right, so I went through the process and created all those holes based on that sketch. That didn't take very long, but in order for me to ask it to do this, I'm going to say, create a 1/4 modeled thread. Now, again, modeled is the word that's used inside of the dialog box at all sketch points in sketch. So I need to know it's sketch 3 through the entire part. All right, so again, in order for me to do that, I know that I just need to click a couple buttons and interact with the model. But for me to tell the assistant to do that, I really already have to know exactly all the steps to make this happen. And this, again, is why I don't think using these tools are really going to be beneficial to a learner, because you already have to know so much information to really get any value out of this. And to me, personally, it still takes quite a little bit of time to prompt it properly to get anything. Now, I'm going to guess that it will mess this up at somehow. Now, correct thread size is 1/4 inch, 0.25 for 1/4. And so up here, you can see it's struggling with the faces, and it's got to go through all this process just to figure this out, to do holes at these sketch points. Now, it'll be interesting to see. It's telling me throughout the whole thing, but it'll be interesting to see if it creates one hole feature at all these locations or if it does individual hole features. I honestly don't know. But again, we could have been done by now. It's still kind of thinking through this process. And I think that was a fairly clear prompt. Create a 1/4 modeled thread hole, modeled thread at all sketch points in sketch 3 through the entire part. I don't know how else I would type that unless I had to specifically say use the hole tool or something like that. And you can see here, alternately, if you can tell me the coordinates of the sketch points in sketch 3, I can work with that. How would you like to proceed? There's no point in me telling it the coordinates. Never mind. All right. And so, again, that's an example. Like, this is an area where if you had a sketch that had a bunch of defined points that you needed a hole at, that's an area where this tool could be beneficial because it would, save you from selection, but you have to be very specific in the task. And in this case, it still couldn't even do it. It wants to know how many sketch points are in sketch 3. I could select the sketch points in the canvas for them, for the tool. And again, it's, at the end of the day, it's not really providing any value. Again, the tools will get better. I want to just, again, be mindful of the fact that this is a tech preview and that the tools will be better at some point. But I just don't see any point to typing natural language exactly what we want to do to get it to do this. Some other things that it can do are interact with model properties. So, change the length parameter to 175. And so again, in this case, it's case sensitive. I need to know there's a parameter called length. I need to know the value of it, and I need to know what to change it to. And so for me to type that in, change the length parameter to 175, And for it to be thinking and do it, it takes, what, 20 seconds, maybe not that long. To do it manually, go to Modify, change parameters, find it in the list, 150, and it's updated, right? And so even in this case, I would already have had to have known exactly what the parameter was called. I had to know what the value was, so I knew what I wanted to change it to. And so in cases where you have to already know so much about the model, it still doesn't make sense to me to do something like that through the assistant. But what about creating geometry? Let's try I'll try a new file. And let me ask it to create a 25 millimeter shaft, 100 millimeters long with modeled threads. So I'm just going to let it go. I didn't give it a specific thread pitch, and it'll probably ask me based on the selection, but I'm just going to let it go, see if it can crank away and see if it can actually make something. Thinking. All right. So here, it gives me the instructions on how to do it. So instead of doing it, it's telling me what I need to do. Create a 25 millimeter shaft, open Fusion, new design. Let's see. Can you do it for me? We'll see if it can do it. Again, I don't know. I haven't tried any of these examples, so we're kind of just seeing what it can do on its own. Now, I will say that I did enable this yesterday, and I played with it a little bit. The response time varies, I think, depending on server performance, load, time of day, that kind of stuff. I had one question, like a help file question, that came back pretty quickly, and another one that took like 30 minutes before it came back to me with an answer. So I do think that performance is going to be key in order to have something like this provide any value. Now it's thinking, at this point, if I were to do this, like I could just do this, 25, hit extrude, type 100. Oop, I missed a type 100, go to my thread tool, click on that. It's going to automatically pick that. I'm going to go modeled, boom, done, right? So you can see there, I was able to do that, again, relatively quickly. I knew it was a fairly easy example. Looks like a dialog is open in Fusion. Could you please close any open dialogues? All right, we'll see what it does now. Kind of let it go and see if it can create something the same. But again, these might be simple examples, but simple examples are really where the tools are at right now. It can't do anything complex currently. Some of the demos, they had like swirling dots create some sort of model, and in reality, that's not where it's at, right? So let's see. Now let me get the cylindrical face to apply the modeled threads. Okay, somehow it disappeared. It used the whole tool, which is going to remove it instead of actually create the thread. So that's an interesting choice. Brought it back, decided that was wrong. Let's see here. I noticed the whole tool was inadvertently applied. Let me undo that instead. All right, here's how to apply them manually. Okay. Now I need to apply the modeled external threads to the cylindrical shaft. Unfortunately, the thread feature is not directly available as a create tool in my current tool set. Okay, so it can't use the thread tool itself. Yeah, it's not exposed to its API. And again, I didn't know that going in. It was just a thing that I wanted to try. But again, it took me very little time knowing a couple of shortcuts and how to do this quickly. And I'll just walk through that as well. So the first shortcut is if you want to create sketch geometry like a circle, you can hit C, and it'll automatically prompt you to select a sketch plane and start a sketch. So that saves a couple of clicks right there. Once we start at the origin, I can type in 25 and hit enter. Then I can hit E for extrude. It automatically selects the profile. I just have to type in the value and hit enter. And there's no shortcut key defined for thread, so I have to go in and pick it. It knows the size. I can just click modeled. I can change this if I want a different thread pitch and say okay, and we're done. And so even with tools that don't have shortcuts, you can configure them. If you use thread all the time, you can pin it to your shortcuts or pin it to the toolbar or change a shortcut keyboard. So for example, if I were to pin it to my shortcuts. So again, circle, top plane, 25, extrude, I hit R, extrude, 100, enter, S, which is going to be my shortcut toolbar, thread, modeled, done, right? Just very quick. And so here, again, this always comes back to, you should learn how to use the tools and make sure that you understand the tools. And then if something like this Autodesk Assistant can improve the process or help you find an answer to a question, then that's fine. But you're going to have to describe the process in such great detail for it to be able to make anything that you're probably better off learning how to use the tools properly yourself. Now, we can ask it to do things like change the appearance of all bodies to blue anodized aluminum and kind of let it go. It should be able to do this. Now, that process to change the appearance to all the bodies, again, relatively simple. All we have to do is know the shortcuts for appearance, which is A on the keyboard. So it found 4 bodies, let me apply the appearance. I'll let it go through this process and then we'll go through it manually as well. So it found all the bodies, some of them are hidden, some of them are visible. It found the aluminum anodized glossy blue, so it was able to parse that out from me just saying anodized aluminum and blue. So that's good. Executing now, and it changed it. And if we go through, you should see all of them are blue, the one that it couldn't create threads on, the original. All right, so now for us to do that manually, all we have to do is hit A, which should open the appearances. We will find the one we're looking for. So if you want an anodized, so what we would do is we type in anodized, and I'm just going to pick this one. We can either drag it into this design to override the default. We could drag it onto a body on the screen. We could drag it onto the component at the top, which will apply it to all bodies in the design. So if I bring some of these other ones back. And so this is fairly quick. And there are some ways to speed this up as well. For example, if you pre-select all the bodies and then you drag the appearance on the selection, it'll apply to all the selected bodies. And here, it doesn't make me a liar. Again, so there are ways to speed up this workflow if you are just comfortable with the software and you know how to use it. Now, let's say that we wanted to change the physical material, all right? Change the, let's say, physical material of all bodies to stainless steel. So I know there's a physical material called stainless steel. It should be able to select all the bodies relatively easily and then apply a stainless steel material. Now, again, it comes back to exactly what you're asking it to do. If you apply a stainless steel material to the component at the top, all of the bodies inside of the component will inherit that material. If you apply it manually to individual bodies, it will not apply at the top level, which means if you have a bill of materials, it's going to say either various or varied, or it's going to take whatever the top level component is. And so here you can say it's done. If I go to one of these bodies and I go to the properties, it says stainless steel, and the appearance is aluminum anodized. And so for me to do that, again, physical material, I'll pick a plastic material, ABS, remove all the materials, say okay. And then now if I look at the properties, it should say ABS plastic. And again, it comes back to how long does it take you to do something like this? Where I see these tools potentially providing benefit is if you've got a big complex design, lots of the same parts or hardware, and you need to make changes like this. Make a configuration that has all of the hardware anodized blue. And then it can create a new configuration. It can find all of the hardware. But then it'll likely need to say, okay, what do you mean by hardware? Everything in the fastener folder. And then it would go through that process. So once again, I feel like there is some promise to tools like this to be beneficial in certain areas. I still very much think that the modeling aspect of it is not where it's at. I don't think geometry creation or applying things like fillets to your design or necessarily changing the appearance or physical material. I don't think these are the areas where these tools are really going to provide any value. I think the tedious tasks for me still on a daily basis are just hangups in how the tools work and not anything that an AI companion could improve. I am interested to hear your thoughts on this. I know this was a long video. I told you at the start it was going to be a long video, but I am interested to hear if you've played with the Autodesk Assistant or other agentic AI CAD Copilot tools and what your thoughts on it. If you have a different opinion, if you found use cases where it has sped up your workflow, if you do use things like automatic constraints or automated drawings, and you feel like there is a benefit to the amount of time those things take. So leave a comment below, let me know. And if you want more of this style of content where I'm just kind of talking on a subject, this is more of like a podcast, then let me know. I've got other topics that I could cover for this, or you could suggest some, and I'm happy to consider those. But any questions or comments, please leave them below. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.